As of this recording, the Surface Duo 2 is still the most performant portable dual-screen Android device on the market. For better or worse, it's also the pinnacle of the pocketable dual-screen hardware that other companies like Kyocera, Sony, ZTE, and LG have spent the past 2+ decades attempting to make work. Those previous attempts required specialized app support, guardrails on dual-screen functionality, or even sectioning off portions of the operating system. Out of the gate, the Surface Duo line required none of that to provide a fluid dual-screen experience. What's more, the software experience on my Surface Duo 2 feels so natural that it should clearly be the blueprint any future manufacturers use for their own dual-screen devices. Unfortunately, as good as the Duo 2 has become, it's also no longer receiving software or security updates, meaning that the current experience using my device will be the final experience until either the hardware dies or I decide to load custom firmware. For me, that's more than good enough. However, let's take a moment to review what the device has to offer right now to see if it's good enough for you. As a refresher, the Surface Duo 2 is an incredibly thin, dual-screen, pocket-sized tablet that released in 2021 as Microsoft's clear response to feedback regarding 2020's Surface Duo 1. With that device, folks complained about a lack of external camera, missing NFC support, non-existent external notifications, large bezels, and the size of the hinge gap. Hence, the Duo 2 comes packed with an external camera, NFC support, a glance bar for notifications, reduced bezel size, and a reduced hinge gap thanks to newly curved displays. All of which is also backed by an upgraded Snapdragon 888 processor and dual 90Hz 4:3 AMOLED displays. As I stated back in my original review, the entire device feels vastly more premium, more substantial than its predecessor. If the Surface Duo 1 were a beta test, the Duo 2 is a full flagship experience. Honestly, even if another dual-screen device launches tomorrow, I'd struggle to imagine how it could provide better-feeling hardware without being insanely expensive. Even then, I probably wouldn't trust the software experience to be flawless. Most multi-screen Android devices fail in general user experience due to a wide range of factors, with software being chief among them. In the past 5-ish years, we've seen other multi-screen setups from both ZTE and LG that have essentially isolated the second screen experience. On those devices, users could move apps to the second screen or maybe even span a supported app across the screens in certain scenarios, typically with dedicated toggles or multi-finger gestures needed. It's worked fine, but has always felt limiting. Meanwhile, the Duo line treats both displays as two halves of a larger tablet, with dedicated zones to snap apps to each display. Any app can seamlessly snap to one display one moment and span both displays on the next with basic Android navigation gestures. Most apps automatically resize or load into their tablet views when spanning. It's an incredibly intuitive experience that required Microsoft working with Google to add features to Android directly. As someone with way too many dual-screen devices, it's remarkable how well integrated Microsoft's made both displays. But it's also part of the reason why the Duo 2, in all its premium glory, will likely be a tough act for other manufacturers to follow. Over the past 2.5-ish years that I've been using my Duo 2, that software experience has become even more fluid with less frequent bugs. In fact, both my Pixel 8 Pro and iPhone 16 Pro Max probably have more software issues these days than my Duo 2. That's especially been the case since it upgraded to Android 12. There are plenty of folks who lament the fact that it'll never get Android 13 or beyond, but honestly, the version of the Microsoft launcher integrated into Android 12 still feels good to use. And I'm not sure how much better newer versions of Android would necessarily feel on this device in terms of user experience. In its current state, everything feels decent with no real qualms to note regarding the overall software experience. Well, except for desktop mode. At launch, the Duo 2 had access to screen mirroring and a bog standard Android desktop mode when plugged into a monitor. At some point, Microsoft removed that in favor of a dedicated remote desktop view. It's handy when needed and clearly syncs with Microsoft's vision for Windows 365, but it feels like a bit of a waste overall. Not that I've spent a ton of time with my Duo 2 plugged into a monitor or anything. With two displays in this form factor, I've been able to do more on this device than on any other pocket-sized device without needing to reach for a laptop. Two distinct displays offers a cleaner experience for multitasking than the split window views available on most other Android devices this size. The software is also smart enough to open links on an unused screen, which truly makes it so much easier to quickly look something up on the fly without exiting an app, or even open a link to an article or Reddit post without swapping windows. Anytime I need or don't need a second display, the software is also seamless in switching the secondary display on or off without disturbing the main display. It genuinely feels like a device that wants to be a pocket computer, much more than the myriad Android phones on the market. And that's without even mentioning the keyboard. I could gush over this thing all day. The default landscape experience is admittedly nothing special. With one screen folded back, the extra display width generally does offer a more comfortable typing experience than on an Android phone, and a split or one-handed view activates contextually with both displays active. Not bad, but it's really when rotated in portrait that the keyboard really sings. When activated, the keyboard takes up the entirety of the bottom display and feels excellent to use. The amount of space available provides the easiest thumb typing experience I've ever experienced on a mobile device. It's so satisfying that I've used it on many occasions to edit scripts in Word and do quick calculations in Excel. Hell, combined with remote desktop and a Bluetooth mouse, that nice keyboard experience even makes for a quick, competent thin client when needed. It's fantastic and could be exactly what someone's looking for if they wanted something more compact than a laptop or a full-size tablet to get work done on their commute. Yet, I honestly think the aspect ratio of the displays are an even bigger selling point. At 4:3, each display is squatter than a standard smartphone. As a result, there's more horizontal space to display text and images. On rare occasion, it's led to weird app scaling shenanigans, but more often than not, it's just made the Duo 2 an easier device to use for reading and social media. Everything feels like it has just a bit more breathing room, and when I want to focus in on something, spanning an app and rotating the device has provided a much larger tablet view than on my Fold 4. Also, just to be clear, that hinge gap's rarely, if ever, been an issue. Of course, only a masochist would try to watch a video span across both screens, especially when using one screen as a kickstand is so much more comfortable. However, spanning articles or social media feeds tends to make the gap disappear. When reading, my eyes tend to focus at the top of the page, not the center. As a result, the gap doesn't interfere with reading whatsoever. Yet, the extra text in my periphery still creates the perception of reading off of a much larger display, which, in turn, feels a lot less cramped. And honestly, if there's one functionality I could recommend the Duo 2 for without compromise or caveat, it's reading. Articles feel as spacious spanned across displays as stories on our NoSleep. Meanwhile, the tablet view for Kindle and likely other e-reader platforms feels spot on with how it fits with these displays. More importantly though, comics. After reading tens of thousands of pages on this device over the years, I can confidently say it's the most comfortable way to read comics that I've found yet, short of physical media of course. Shonen Jump, K-manga, playbooks, and certain Kindle published comics span the displays in a way that feels much more comfortable than just about any other reading device I've tried in the past. Meanwhile, Microsoft's own OneDrive PDF reader has specific dual screen support for reading the various comics I've stashed away from Humble Bundle. The actual physical sensation of holding two halves of a book is excellent. Meanwhile, the hinge gap and curved displays are perfectly positioned to mimic the binding of a book. It all just feels right, in a way that even my Fold 4 can't live up to unless I feel like only reading a single page at a time. Even compared to the Duo 1, the experience feels much more spacious thanks to the bigger, nicer displays, and how the black colorway hides any blank space. If you're someone who's really into reading comics digitally, it's hard to think of a better device than the Duo 2. Though, realistically, I imagine most folks will have their eyes on this device for gaming. Dual screens means a solid way to emulate dual screen consoles. And yeah, it's great for doing that. In fact, it's the all-around best Android device for dual screen emulation currently on the market. And again, it's gonna be hard to beat unless someone copies its form factor exactly. Two 4x3 displays are near perfect for emulating DS games. Especially given the upscaling available in modern DS emulators and the plentiful telescopic controller options, it very much provides the experience of a high-end DSi XL. Add in the native Surface Pen support, and certain stylus-heavy games can actually feel better to play on this device than on original hardware. I'd go so far as to say that this is probably the ultimate DS experience you can find, unless you're looking to play a very specific game not supported by current emulators. Now, 3DS emulation is admittedly less perfect, due to the 3DS's top screen being 5x3 instead of 4x3, but performance is still overall solid. The Snapdragon 888 inside isn't powerful enough to comfortably scale all games beyond 2x, but I've never had any problem with how games looked on these displays. The only real hitch will be the underlying emulators at this point. Some games will naturally run better than others, and any lingering compatibility issues will probably require waiting for the results of the collaboration between Pablo MK7 and the Lime 3DS team, which is still better than I could say for Wii U emulation on this device. Once more, the Snapdragon 888 won't offer the best performance ever, but it'll still be usable in many games. The real downside comes down to the fact that CMU for Android is still very early in development. The latest release, as of this video, doesn't even support display rotation and crashes frequently when trying to span the emulator across displays. I'm certain it'll get better over time, but right now, dual-screen Wii U emulation on Android doesn't seem to be a reality. DS and 3DS emulation, on the other hand, are definitely big wins for this device, and solid excuses to pick one up for those looking for the best possible dual-screen emulation experience on Android. However, I might honestly call single-screen gaming an even bigger reason for emulation fans to try a Duo 2. With one screen folded back and a telescopic controller tacked on, this is actually the largest, most performant 4x3 handheld on the market. It's not going to be ideal for 16:9 consoles like Wii U or PSP, however, for the variety of 4x3 consoles folks would actually emulate on an Android device, like PS2, GameCube, and Wii, it's excellent. Typical Android smartphones and similarly performant handhelds like the Razer Edge, Odin 2, or Neo Pocket S add large black bars around 4x3 gameplay. It's a usable but not ideal experience. Yet, with the Duo 2, games fill the entire display with all the wonderful contrast OLED has to offer. Given that the device can run those consoles upscaled to display resolution, I could see it being the perfect option for folks who might like the idea of the 4x3 Retroid Pocket Mini, but want a larger, nicer display with the option to bring their own controller. Not that an external controller is even always necessary. With one screen occupied, most emulators and some streaming apps will allow for a touch controller to fill the entire second display. Touch controllers obviously have their limitations, especially for games that heavily use L2 and R2, but I've found it extremely convenient and comfortable to use for slower paced titles. With other Android devices, my gripe with touch controls typically centers on them covering gameplay or feeling cramped. Here, they're completely out of the way and have a ton of extra space for me to rearrange as needed. Though, if you'd rather avoid touch controls altogether, I get it, and there's nothing stopping you from still using an external controller, but maybe you're running a different app on the second screen. Maybe it's a YouTube video playing in the background while you grind a few levels. Maybe it's a Discord chat open to chat with some squad mates. Or maybe it's just a map of the area that you're in to make sure you're going in the right direction. The combination of the Duo 2's displays being a bit wider than most Android devices and having that second screen just at all makes for a really flexible yet convenient gameplay setup that's difficult to replicate elsewhere. Unfortunately, as much praise as I could lob at this device, there are some downsides to consider before you consider hunting one down for yourself. Chief among them is that no matter how basic it might look, this is a device with a much different form factor and software logic than just about any other Android device on the market. I could speak volumes about how intuitive it is to use for me, but I also have the bias of having used Surface Duo devices since 2020. If you're coming into this device brand new to the Duo line, expect to spend a bit of time getting used to its specific quirks, like how gestures come from the same angle regardless of rotation, or that certain apps are hard-coded to only work in one orientation. This is far from a stock Android experience, and how easy it is to adapt to will generally depend on how much of a different flavor of Android is ingrained in your muscle memory. The second issue is a bit less subjective, in audio delay that makes gameplay a bit awkward. In certain games and emulators, the Duo 2 has an odd 1-second delay to some audio coming out of its stereo speakers. The problem seems to stem from a bug in the audio drivers that Microsoft failed to patch. As someone who's typically playing games muted, it doesn't bug me too much, but it's sure to be frustrating to anyone who casually wants to listen to their game's music. Luckily, there are a couple workarounds. Bluetooth audio seems to make the delay go away altogether. If you're the type of person who connects headphones when you play anyway, that's going to be the easiest route. You'll need to connect and disconnect a Bluetooth audio device once to clear the delay altogether. Unsure why this works, but you'll need to redo the process every single time you reopen your game. The other workaround is to just use different apps when available. For certain emulators like Drastic and Citra, the delay is quite noticeable, but you can get around it by swapping to an alternative. For whatever reason, both MeloDS for DS emulation and Limeroid for 3DS emulation don't have the audio delay issue and are excellent for a device like the Duo 2. Now, in my experience, neither MeloDS nor Limeroid have quite the same compatibility or performance as Drastic or Citra, respectively, but they tend to work very well in most use cases. Unfortunately, there's not always a second app to use. Certain Android games, as well as higher-end emulators like Dolphin and Aether SX2, both have the delay issue and don't have any real alternatives. For those, you're pretty much stuck with the Bluetooth workaround or muting your audio. The final caveat is that, obviously, the Duo 2 is no longer receiving security updates. Android devices without security updates are potentially hazardous for folks without common sense. Without patches for latest vulnerabilities, there's technically a higher likelihood for successful cyber attacks that could impact personal data. Where the common sense bit comes in is that if you're only using trusted applications and websites, as you probably should be doing anyway, the actual risk for the average person is fairly low, especially within the year or so following the end of support. Although I still wouldn't recommend using one of these as a business device or to access highly personal information, like your bank account. Erring on the side of caution is always best. If you do that, you can very well keep using a Duo 2 until this hardware dies. Although, I'd be doing a disservice to not point out some workarounds for the security updates issue. Though the Surface Duo line hasn't sold all that well, it's gotten a ton of interest from community developers in two different routes. The first route is a build of Android 15 called Duo DE that replaces the current Microsoft Launcher experience with a modified AOSP build specifically for Surface Duo. The build utilizes a modified desktop view to add floating window support and performance tweaks, while attempting to retain the same general vibe and functionality of the Duo line. As a work in progress, it's not guaranteed that all functionality will work well, but it could be exactly what some folks are after if they're sick and tired of the Android 12 experience. The second route is a build of Windows on ARM for Surface Duo. As you might imagine, this replaces Android with a full-fledged Windows 11 experience, plus some additional tweaks to work with the Duo line's unique form factor. For those who don't remember, the original Surface Duo was initially conceived as a pocket-sized Windows tablet to live beside the larger Surface Neo. For a variety of reasons, that didn't work out, and the team needed to pivot fast to Android. The Duo 2 feels far removed from those early concepts, but the idea of eventually turning it into a Windows tablet feels kind of right to me. There's just one hitch. While Surface Duo 1 functionality is relatively far along, Duo 2 support is still in its early stages, with the devs calling the current experience highly broken and experimental. As a community project, better support will come at its own pace, and might be more so something to keep an eye on rather than purchase a Duo 2 specifically to try, especially since Duo 2s aren't the cheapest devices in the world. Which brings us to the final topic of this video, general scarcity. As might be obvious from Microsoft not making a Duo 3, the Duo 2 didn't sell very well. Unlike the Duo 1, Microsoft also didn't manufacture a ton of extra units that are now selling at a lower price. From what I can tell, they made just enough devices to fill their expected low sales, and that's what we'll be left with going forward. Even worse, an all-glass tablet with curved displays about as thin as its USB-C port, it doesn't really spell confidence for general durability. That's especially true since there aren't really any cases for this tablet due to its form factor, beyond the bumpers provided by Microsoft. Even skins are a hassle, since they're often too thick to allow the device to fold back flat, which could put extra strain on its hinge. Now, to be fair, I've had no issues with mine, despite not using it with the packaged bumpers and treating it the same as any other device living in my pocket. Heck, during road trips, I've even propped it up on a car dashboard to use as navigation. However, plenty of folks aren't as lucky as I am. Take a trip to eBay here in the US and you're bound to find devices on sale with cracked displays outnumbering pristine models. Yet, even with huge cracks, they're not cheap. If you want a working device in decent condition, you'll likely be shelling out around $600, unless you get lucky with an auction. And honestly, it's only going to get worse over time. Low sales volumes combined with unique form factors have a habit of making devices much more expensive as they age. Unlike its more abundant, less performant predecessor, the Duo 2 likely isn't something someone can just pick up on a whim to play around with. At about double the price of a high-end Android handheld, or the same price as a recent flagship smartphone, the Surface Duo 2 is a device that makes the most sense for someone who has a specific use case that it can uniquely handle better than other devices. And that's really a bummer, because that's kind of the whole issue with the Surface Duo 2 since launch. Back in 2021, it launched at $1,500, way more than anyone but a combination dual-screen nerd and Surface fan like myself would be willing to pay. The price came down somewhat a year later, but it's never felt attainable for the average person to get their hands on and try for themselves, despite the significant work Microsoft put into improving the user experience over time. Even more than the original Surface Duo, the Duo 2 is a device that folks really need to use and play around with to understand. It's inherently so radically different a user experience compared to the vast majority of Android devices folks are used to that there's no way a random non-tech savvy person would pick one up over other more familiar devices. Which sucks. As I've mentioned, the Duo 2 is a really unique pocket tablet that's as fantastic for productivity work as it is relaxing with a comic or playing Billy Hatcher. It's one of those devices that seems perfect for white-collar workers like myself to use as both a work device and a way to relax at the end of the day. Even though it's been a few months since I swapped it out as my secondary device, I still have moments where I groan because something takes longer to do on either my iPhone or Pixel than it would have on my Duo 2. If Microsoft had maintained support longer, it'd likely still be in my pocket every day. But with the lack of security updates, it's been effectively downgraded to an e-reader, an occasional gaming device for me. If you're someone with money to spare and a dedicated e-reader or dual screen emulation device sounds perfect, I'd say give it a shot while you can. Otherwise, I'd say cross your fingers and hope that the next company who attempts dual screen hardware follows Microsoft's designs without being too expensive. Those have been my thoughts though. Now's the time when I ask for yours. Are you someone who's fascinated by dual screen hardware like me, or have you used either Surface Duo in the past? Let me know down in the comments. As always, if you found this video interesting or informative, go ahead and give it a like to let me know, and then get subscribed for more dual screen hardware videos in the very near future. If you enjoyed this video, maybe consider checking out either our dual screen hardware roundup or LG V60 retrospective from last year. While not the most common, there are plenty of different dual screen experiences available right now, each with their own fascinating implications for user experience. But hey, that's going to be all for this video though. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end. Until next time, catch you later.